I didn't plan a horror episode, but the printer sure did. Will today's project be a total horror story or a killer success? Next up on Tina Tries. Happy spooky season! I set out to print a 1/6 scale Friday the 13th diorama of Jason Voorhees. Full scene, and this one totally fought back. Parts snapped, a layer shift almost destroyed the centerpiece, and tiny details got entombed in supports. Today, I'm going to show you how I rescued this. Reorienting, splitting, gluing, welding, and repainting from fail to finish. This project applies the skills I learned from the Jinx figurine back in episode 6, so if you haven't seen that one yet, you might want to go back and watch that one first. This is a paid model by 3D Wicked. They have a full website as well as a Patreon. Their diorama and figurine models are amazing. They have STL files that you can use either on a resin printer or an FDM printer. Definitely check them out. Links will be provided in the description below. I printed this on an H2D and an X1 carbon. These files took about 150 hours to finish printing. It also took over 2 kilograms of filament to complete. I used black and white PLA, white PETG, and Bamboo's support for PLA to print this one. Otherwise, this model requires a lot of time, acrylic paint, a bit of super glue, some sandpaper, and Mod Podge to seal it all up. Let's survive this together. I saw this file on 3D Wicked's website, and I knew that I had to make this for my first Halloween episode. I had just gotten the H2D printer, and I wanted to test out the huge new print bed. So I sent the entire base, as well as Jason's body, in one go, because everything fit on the plate. Whether or not that was a good idea, we shall see. I have found that encasing figures in normal supports best preserves the details in models like these, so I decided to use white PLA as the supports so that I could visually tell what needed to be removed from the main model after printing completed. Brilliant idea. I highly suggest using a contrasting color for support material if you can, especially on highly detailed pieces like these. Not so brilliant idea, printing the base in one piece. Look at how embedded the dock is here. I had to remove all of that from underneath a dock that doesn't move and is 10 inches long. It was a nightmare. During the print, the bed shifted, which left a really noticeable line all the way across the base and on Jason's legs near his ankles. But I let it go because it looked like it could be covered up or minimized during the painting process. So that issue could be fixed in post one way or another. After about 3 days of printing, the support on Jason's right arm completely gave way. There was no way I was stopping the print at that point. Luckily, it miraculously managed to recover at the armpit since that was attached to the main body. So I breathed a little sigh of relief because I could just slice the arm on the file at the point where it had recovered and reprint the lower arm portion separately. For Jason's head, I reduced the layer height to 0.08 millimeters, which on Bamboo printers is the extra fine setting, to make the top of his head as smooth as I could get it. That way I wouldn't need to sand or fill any layer lines, and it came out beautifully. When the main plate was finally finished, which, by the way, was 5.5 days later, it was difficult to remove from the printer because it was so full and really heavy. Then I started the process of removing the supports. It literally took days. Trying to remove normal supports from underneath a fixed dock and around the figure of the girl without breaking anything was nearly impossible. And see those bushes? Impossible. The plants are extremely delicate and brittle, and there was no way to remove the supports without shattering them. So I ended up cutting them off of the base entirely. I reprinted them with tree supports, still a no-go. I tried printing them without supports. Definitely not a good idea. The only way that I could get them to print and stay intact was to use bamboo's support for PLA. Even then, it took a couple of hours to get the supports removed without breaking them, but it did work. This probably would have been a good use case for using water-soluble PVA support material, but I didn't have any on hand at the time. His mask had to be printed twice. The first time I used black PLA for support, and it got all mixed up in the final white mask print. The mask itself was really thin and it looked awful with the specks of black PLA embedded in it. So I decided to use PETG and print it on a more vertical angle. The second mask looked much better. Once the supports were all sufficiently removed, I started the long hand painting process. I used acrylic paints, a flat brush, and a few different detail brushes. I started with the water on the base, using gloss colors to give it a nice sheen. I wanted this scene to look like it was nighttime, so I made a really deep blue for the water and added white edges to the tops of the waves. That way it looked like moonlight reflecting on the top of the water. This was when I realized that the shift line from the printing process couldn't be covered up with paint tricks. So I got out my wood burning tool with a flat end attachment. I set it to a relatively low temperature and tried smoothing out the lines. To my shock, this worked amazingly well without really messing up the paint somehow. I don't know why it worked, but it did. Painting the water took about 3 hours overall. Next came painting the dock. I painted it brown and then did several darker washes to fill in the wood grain, give it some depth, and make it look a little bit dirty. I also added glossy red to the muddy footprint impressions on the dock. After that, I started working on the girl. I sanded the layer lines on the top part of her upraised arm to minimize those as much as possible. It was really difficult to paint her as she's wedged between the dock and the waves, so it took some weird angles and creative brush strokes to get to everything. Definitely would have been easier to paint had I printed her separately. Initially, I made her skin look like porcelain as it would look in the moonlight. Later on in the painting process, I ended up going back with a pink wash as well as a really faint gray to accentuate the areas where there would be shadows to make her look a little bit more natural. I gave her hair some highlights by dry brushing on a lighter brown. Also gave her a bit of makeup to bring out her eyes and make her look a little bit flushed. I added tiny white dots in her eyes to make her look terrified, and I painted her bathing suit a deep red. When I went to seal her up, I used a gloss Mod Podge so that it looked like she was wet from being in the water. Next up were the fragile plants, which I painted in a deep green, and I added lighter green highlights to the top edges of some of the leaves to mimic moonlighting. This took a very light touch, as I knew the plants were prone to breaking easily. It took me about an hour and a half to paint those. Then came the Welcome to Camp Crystal Lake sign. This tiny sign was a lot more involved and detailed than I was expecting. I had to paint a tiny landscape in my big diorama, and it was a bit tedious to do every side of the lettering without getting the paint on the yellow background. That part definitely required a steady hand and tiny detail brushes. I wanted the sign to look weathered and still keep with the nighttime color scheme, so I started with all light colors, and then I did a black and brown wash pass to weather it. It's always a good idea to start with an extremely watery mix and dab it off, and then just keep layering it on. You can always add to the paint, but you can't remove it once it's applied. So once I was happy with all of my weathering on the sign, it was finally time to start working on Jason. First, I reattached his arm with a bit of super glue, and I filled in the gaps with plastic wood filler. I started painting his pants, and then I realized that there were the shift lines from the print that I needed to fix. So since I already had the wood filler out, I ended up using that to patch the shift lines. After the wood filler dried thoroughly, I sanded down those areas with a 400 grit sandpaper and got back to painting. I went with a blue-gray mix for his pants, a really deep navy blue for the shirt, and a basic brown for his boots. For his skin, I went a pink-leaning color and added a slightly darker pink for his scars and also for the veins that are sticking out of his head. His machete, I painted a pewter gray and used a gloss red mixed with a little bit of gloss black. That gave it a nice shine and also kind of a deeper red color for the blood. Then it was time for a general dirt and blood splatter pass. I added the browns and the reds in little sections, and I used my fingers to smudge it around and lighten it up. There were a few sections on his clothes that were clearly meant to be blood splatter, so that helped with placement. You don't want to overdo it because it's easier to add more dirt than it is to have to repaint the entire figure again. Jason's eyes were a bit tricky. I actually had to do them twice to get them so that it looked like he was actually looking at the girl. I had to put him in the diorama to get the angle just right. Painting Jason start to finish probably took me about 6 hours. For the paint on the mask, I used an antique white, which I made slightly darker around the edges to make it look old, and I used a dark red for the markings. I didn't particularly like the strap that printed out with the file. It was extremely thin and brittle, which I was afraid would break with repeated mask removal, so I opted for making one out of a leather bracelet strap instead. I cut the leather to the right lengths, and I attached it to the mask with hot glue. Easy peasy. Finally, everything got a coating of Mod Podge to seal it up. I used the gloss Mod Podge on the water and the girl, as well as all of the blood splatter, and I used matte Mod Podge on everything else. After it was dry, I glued the plants into place and all of Jason's pieces together using miter apple without the activator spray. I did not want the activator spray leaving marks on this beautiful piece. Here is the finished diorama. How cool is this? There are a lot of ways that you can customize this build. So there are several different weapons that you can choose from, including a clean bloodless machete and an axe. There are also 3 different versions of the mask that you can print. And here's the best part, his mask is removable. Take it off and put it back on as you wish. On my version, I added the leather strap, and I think that looks great. So that's another option that you can do, which is not part of the STL file or the instructions. This was quite the build. Moral of the story, just because you can print something in one piece does not mean it's a good idea to do that. In hindsight, I absolutely would print this entire thing in all of its separate pieces. And yes, there are files to do that. It would have been much easier to paint and remove the supports had I printed each piece individually. Getting the supports out from under this dock was a nightmare. Getting the supports out from around the girl was a nightmare. Painting the girl was a nightmare. Even the sign was kind of difficult because there were various pieces in the way while I was trying to paint. But I figured it all out. I got creative with my fixes, and I'm really pleased with how this turned out. I did contact Bamboo about the shifting issue, and I never heard back from them. But there have been several firmware updates since then, and I have not had that problem since. So hopefully they've resolved that issue. This project certainly had its problems, but I would call this one a killer success. That's gonna do it for this episode. My next video will be a reaction video, and then I'm gonna jump back into another build, so stay tuned for those. If you enjoyed this, please hit the like and subscribe buttons. Leave me some project suggestions in the comments section below, and I will see you on the next one.